What if the supposedly innocent 1950s were hiding movies that governments, churches, courts, and censorship boards desperately wanted audiences to avoid? Not every original ban survives today, but these 19 films were prohibited, rejected, heavily cut, or restricted somewhere, and several became famous precisely because authorities tried to keep them away from the public. Before we enter this forbidden side of the 50s, hit like, share this video with another classic film fan, and subscribe to the channel. Number 18. Glenn or Glenda, 1953. Few low-budget movies from the decade feel as strange, personal, and impossible to categorize as this one. Directed by Ed Wood, the picture mixes drama, documentary-style narration, surreal dream sequences, social commentary, and Bela Lugosi delivering mysterious speeches that often seem to belong to an entirely different movie. At the center is Glenn, played by Wood himself, a man terrified of explaining an important part of his private life to the woman he hopes to marry. Rather than treating Glenn simply as a joke, the story repeatedly asks the audience to consider how fear, secrecy, and social judgment can damage people. The famous dream sequence is where the movie becomes truly bizarre. Ordinary storytelling disappears as Glenn moves through symbolic imagery, strange rooms, dramatic faces, shadows, and threatening figures. Bela Lugosi appears like some kind of supernatural observer, commenting on events with lines that sound both profound and completely unpredictable. Critics later mocked the film's tiny budget, awkward performances, and unusual construction, but the subject itself was far more daring than almost anything mainstream Hollywood was discussing in 1953. British censors refused to approve the movie for normal exhibition, and it remained unavailable to ordinary cinema audiences there for decades. Today, Glenn or Glenda is remembered, partly because of its technical imperfections, but also because Ed Wood tried to talk openly about people society preferred to pretend did not exist. Number 17. I, 1953. Long before rebellious teenagers became a major Hollywood obsession, Michelangelo Antonioni was already presenting young people in a much colder and more disturbing way. This unusual European anthology tells separate stories involving troubled youths in France, Italy, and Britain. These are not romantic rebels fighting against unfair parents. Their choices are selfish, reckless, and sometimes frighteningly pointless. One story follows students involved in a plan against one of their own friends because they want money. Another focuses on a young smuggler living dangerously on the edges of society. The British section follows an ambitious young man who discovers a body and begins thinking less about the victim than about how the discovery might make him famous. That emotional emptiness gives the movie its power. Antonioni refuses to provide easy excuses for the characters. The French segment caused particular trouble because it was inspired by a real criminal case involving young people. Authorities feared the movie was exploiting recent events, and political pressure led to changes and restrictions. British censors also refused the picture a certificate during the 1950s. One of the most memorable things about I, is how little excitement Antonioni allows his criminals to enjoy. Their actions do not make them powerful. They make them smaller, more isolated, and increasingly trapped. For audiences expecting glamorous juvenile rebellion, this was something much more uncomfortable. A portrait of young people capable of destroying lives for almost nothing. Number 16. Outrage, 1950. At the beginning of the decade, director Ida Lupino went directly toward a subject mainstream Hollywood almost always avoided. The movie follows Anne Walton, a young woman preparing for marriage and expecting an ordinary future. Her life changes after a traumatic attack, but Lupino does not build the film around sensational images of what happened. Instead, she concentrates on the aftermath. That choice makes the story unusually powerful. Anne tries to return to normal life, yet ordinary sounds, faces, streets, and interactions suddenly feel threatening. She believes strangers are staring at her. Innocent gestures remind her of what happened. Even people who want to help cannot fully understand why she no longer feels safe inside the life she once knew. One particularly effective sequence follows Anne through familiar surroundings, while background noises become increasingly overwhelming. The camera and editing make the audience experience her fear rather than merely watch it. For 1950, this was remarkably direct filmmaking. The subject was considered so sensitive that the picture faced serious censorship problems, including a ban in Ireland. Some authorities were uncomfortable even with the idea that such trauma could be discussed openly in commercial entertainment. Outrage is sometimes placed beside exploitation movies because of its controversial subject, but Lupino's approach is almost the opposite of cheap sensationalism. She was interested in the person left behind after the shocking event was over. That made the film both more compassionate and, for 1950s censors, even more difficult to ignore. If forgotten censorship stories like these are your kind of classic cinema, give the video a like and subscribe, because the films get even more controversial from here. And share this countdown with someone who still believes every movie from the 1950s was safe, polite, and harmless. Number 15. Lady Chatterley's Lover, 1955. Sometimes a film does not need shocking images to create a censorship battle. It simply needs to suggest that society's official moral rules might not make everyone happy. This French adaptation follows Constance Chatterley, a woman living inside an emotionally empty marriage. Her husband may provide social position and financial security, but their relationship has become distant. Gradually, she develops a connection with gamekeeper Oliver Mellers. Compared with later adaptations of D.H. Lawrence's novel, the 1955 movie is restrained. Yet the central problem for censors was not what the camera showed. It was the movie's attitude. Constance is not portrayed simply as an evil woman who must immediately be punished for breaking the rules of marriage. The story allows viewers to understand her loneliness and the emotional reasons behind her relationship. One of the film's strongest elements is the contrast between the cold, controlled environment of her marriage and the warmer scenes where Constance begins rediscovering a sense of freedom. American censorship authorities, particularly in New York, objected strongly. The state refused to license the picture because officials believed it treated adultery too sympathetically. The dispute eventually reached the United States Supreme Court. Years later, the filmmakers won an important victory against the idea that authorities could ban a movie merely because they disliked its moral viewpoint. What seemed like a romantic drama became part of a much larger argument. Should adults only be allowed to watch stories that agree with the government's definition of acceptable behavior? By the end of the controversy, Lady Chatterley's Lover had helped make that question much harder for censors to answer. Number 14. The Moon is Blue, 1953. Hollywood could show murder, war, gangsters, and betrayal, but sometimes a few words spoken by an unmarried woman were apparently considered more dangerous. Otto Preminger's comedy begins when architect Don Gresham meets young actress Patty O'Neill. He invites her back to his apartment, expecting a romantic evening, but Patty refuses to behave like the type of woman he understands. She talks openly. That is basically the scandal. Patty asks blunt questions about attraction, marriage, relationships, and adult behavior. The conversations are playful rather than graphic, but they use ideas and vocabulary that Hollywood's production code did not want appearing in respectable movies. Preminger refused to change the film enough to satisfy the code. Instead, United Artists released it without official approval. That was a direct challenge to one of the most powerful systems controlling American cinema. Local authorities reacted quickly. The picture faced bans and restrictions in several places, and some theaters used adults-only policies because managers feared controversy. One of the funniest elements is watching the male characters become increasingly uncomfortable while Patty remains calm. She is not behaving dangerously. She is simply saying things everyone understands, but respectable movies were expected to avoid. That made The Moon is Blue surprisingly important. Its success proved that audiences would pay to see movies without the production code seal, weakening the industry's belief that the code was absolutely necessary. The scandal was not really about romance. It was about who controlled the conversation. Number 13. Some Like It Hot, 1959. By 1959, Billy Wilder seemed almost determined to demonstrate how outdated Hollywood censorship had become. The story begins with musicians Joe and Jerry accidentally witnessing a gangland killing in Chicago. Knowing the criminals may come after them, the two men need to disappear quickly. Their solution is unforgettable. They disguise themselves as women, rename themselves Josephine and Daphne, and join an all-female band traveling to Florida. There they meet Sugar Kane, played by Marilyn Monroe, and immediately create an even bigger collection of problems. Joe becomes attracted to Sugar and invents yet another identity to impress her. Jerry, meanwhile, unexpectedly becomes the romantic target of wealthy millionaire Osgood Fielding. The comedy repeatedly plays with identity, attraction, deception, and social expectations in ways that made conservative censors extremely nervous. Its most famous moment comes at the very end. Jerry finally removes his disguise and explains to Osgood why they cannot marry. Each excuse fails until Jerry reveals the truth directly. Osgood responds with one of the most famous closing lines in movie history. The joke completely destroys the moral certainty the censors wanted. Kansas banned the picture, while the film was released without normal production code approval. Yet audiences loved it. Instead of damaging the movie, the controversy helped demonstrate that the public was already far more comfortable with complicated comedy than Hollywood's censorship system assumed. Today, Some Like It Hot is considered a classic. The Dangerous Movie won. The Rules did not. Number 12. And God Created Woman, 1956. A single movie transformed Brigitte Bardot from a French actress into one of the most recognizable international stars of the decade. She plays Juliette, a young woman living in Saint-Tropez who refuses to behave according to the expectations surrounding her. Men constantly attempt to control her. Some want to marry her. Others want to possess her. Older members of the community judge her behavior. Yet Juliette keeps making choices according to her own emotions, even when those decisions create chaos around her. That attitude made the movie more provocative than its actual imagery. The sequence that became legendary shows Juliette dancing with almost complete freedom, while the people around her watch in fascination and discomfort. Bardot's physical confidence immediately separates her from the carefully managed romantic heroines of traditional Hollywood. She does not seem interested in whether the audience approves of her. Censorship boards certainly did not. The movie encountered restrictions, cuts, and moral outrage in several markets. Religious groups condemned it, while distributors learned very quickly that controversy could be turned into advertising. That became part of the film's historical importance. Instead of destroying Bardot's career, attempts to suppress the movie created curiosity. Audiences wanted to discover what was supposedly so dangerous. The answer was simpler than authorities expected. The movie showed a young woman refusing to feel ashamed simply because other people wanted her to. By the late 1950s, that alone could be enough to create an international scandal. Number 11. The King and I, 1956. It looks like one of the safest films on this entire countdown. There are elaborate costumes, beautiful palace sets, children, songs, romance, comedy, and a performance by Yul Brynner that became one of the defining roles of his career. Yet in Thailand, the movie represented something far more serious. Deborah Kerr plays Anna Leonowens, an English teacher who arrives in 19th century Siam after being hired to educate the children of King Mongkut. Anna and the king immediately clash. She expects him to respect promises and Western ideas about education. He expects obedience inside his palace. Their relationship gradually develops into mutual admiration, although neither completely accepts the other's worldview. The famous polka sequence captures that tension beautifully. Anna teaches the king to dance, and for a few minutes, political disagreement disappears beneath music, movement, and genuine affection. It remains one of the movie's most beloved scenes. But Thai authorities objected strongly to the film's representation of their monarchy and national history. The portrayal of King Mongkut was considered disrespectful and historically inaccurate. Because Thailand treats depictions of the monarchy with exceptional sensitivity, the movie was prohibited there. That gives The King and I one of the strangest censorship histories of any Hollywood musical. American audiences saw colorful family entertainment. Thai authorities saw foreigners reshaping their royal history for entertainment. The same movie could therefore look harmless in one country and deeply offensive in another. Number 10. The Immoral Mr. Tease, 1959. By the closing months of the decade, filmmakers had discovered a completely new business strategy. Stop apologizing for exploitation and sell the forbidden material directly. Russ Meyer's first feature follows Mr. Tease, a painfully ordinary delivery man whose imagination gradually becomes more interesting than his actual life. As he moves through everyday situations, the women around him begin appearing inside elaborate fantasies. There is not much traditional plot. That was not the point. Earlier adult-oriented films often disguised themselves as documentaries about health, art, or naturism. Meyer pushed that excuse aside and constructed a comedy around the very thing audiences were supposedly not meant to see. One memorable sequence places Tease near the water as fantasy and reality begin blending together. The tone is playful rather than threatening, with exaggerated narration and bright photography giving the movie an almost cartoonish quality. But censors were not laughing. The picture became involved in obscenity controversies and later faced a ban in Baltimore. Its commercial success mattered even more than its legal problems. Produced cheaply, The Immoral Mr. Tease earned enough attention and money to prove that a nationwide audience existed for independent movies operating beyond mainstream Hollywood standards. Other producers noticed. Within a few years, the American exploitation industry would become much more aggressive. So while Mr. Tease himself may look harmless, the movie represented something genuinely dangerous to the old censorship system. It proved filmmakers might no longer need Hollywood's permission. Number 9. The Lovers, 1958. This quiet French film became part of American constitutional history because authorities believed one woman's romantic choices were simply too dangerous for audiences. Jeanne Moreau plays Jeanne Tournier, a wealthy married woman whose life looks comfortable from the outside. Inside, she is miserable. Her husband is emotionally distant, and even an existing relationship outside the marriage fails to provide the connection she wants. Then an unexpected encounter introduces her to Bernard, a younger man who awakens feelings she had almost forgotten. Director Louis Malle refuses to treat Jeanne like a simple villain. That was the problem. During the famous nighttime sequence, the camera follows Jeanne and Bernard through the house and garden as their attraction becomes increasingly difficult to resist. Nothing resembles later graphic cinema. The scene depends on silence, glances, shadows, movement, and implication. But implication was enough. When the movie was exhibited in Ohio, a theater manager was convicted under state obscenity laws. The case eventually reached the United States Supreme Court as Jacobellis v. Ohio. In 1964, the court reversed the conviction. That legal victory became famous, partly because Justice Potter Stewart struggled to define obscenity precisely, but explained that he recognized it when he encountered it, and this movie did not qualify. Behind the legal language was a simple cultural conflict. The censors wanted a story where a married woman who broke social expectations was clearly condemned. Malle gave audiences emotional ambiguity instead. That was more threatening than anything explicit could have been. Number 8. Anatomy of a Murder, 1959. A courtroom might seem like one of the safest settings in Hollywood. Otto Preminger turned it into a censorship battlefield. James Stewart plays Paul Beegler, a small-town lawyer defending Lieutenant Frederick Mannion, who is accused of killing a man connected to an alleged attack on Mannion's wife, Laura. The case is complicated from the beginning. Beegler does not know whether his client is telling the complete truth. Laura behaves in ways that make several characters suspicious of her. Witnesses contradict each other. Every piece of evidence can be interpreted differently. Instead of simplifying the case, the movie forces the audience to sit with uncertainty. Its most controversial scenes happen inside the courtroom. Lawyers and witnesses discuss evidence, using vocabulary that mainstream Hollywood normally avoided. Preminger wanted the trial to sound like an actual adult legal proceeding, not a cleaned-up version designed for polite entertainment. That directness produced immediate censorship trouble. Ireland initially refused the movie. When it was eventually accepted, numerous cuts removed significant portions of the courtroom testimony and discussion. Even in America, advertising became controversial because Saul Bass's famous poster used the outline of a divided body. The movie's reputation survived everything. What makes Anatomy of a Murder so effective is that no character feels completely innocent or completely trustworthy. The audience becomes another juror, constantly deciding who might be lying. Preminger understood something censors hated admitting. Adult subjects could be treated seriously without making the audience immoral. Number 7. Rock Around the Clock, 1956. Authorities were not afraid of blood, monsters, or forbidden romance this time. They were afraid teenagers might stand up and start dancing. Built around Bill Haley and his Comets, Rock Around the Clock tells a lightweight story about promoter Steve Hollis discovering a new style of music and attempting to convince the entertainment industry that young audiences are ready for it. The plot is basically an excuse for performances, and those performances caused chaos. When Bill Haley launches into the title song, the movie suddenly stops feeling like an old-fashioned Hollywood musical. Teenagers clap, dance, shout, and move with an energy completely different from the controlled choreography adults were accustomed to seeing. Young viewers in real theaters sometimes reacted the same way. Reports emerged of audiences dancing in aisles, shouting during screenings, damaging seats, and refusing to behave according to traditional cinema etiquette. That produced an unusual kind of censorship. In some places, officials were not banning the content because of what appeared on screen. They were restricting the film because of what they feared might happen inside the theater. Local councils and exhibitors in several regions refused screenings. Internationally, disturbances associated with rock and roll films fed a growing moral panic about teenage behavior. The adults were watching something bigger than Bill Haley. They were watching young people develop their own music, clothes, slang, and identity. The film's cheerful performances looked innocent. To frightened authorities, however, The sight of hundreds of teenagers responding together suggested something far more dangerous. A generation was learning it did not need permission to have its own culture. Number 6. Rififi, 1955. Jules Dassin's crime masterpiece became controversial for a reason few directors could have expected. Officials thought the robbery was simply too realistic. The story follows Tony LeStefanois, a criminal recently released from prison. Instead of rebuilding his life, Tony joins several associates planning the robbery of an exclusive Paris jewelry store. These are not glamorous gentlemen thieves. They argue, make mistakes, betray each other, and discover that pulling off the robbery is much easier than surviving what comes afterward. Then comes the film's legendary centerpiece. For nearly half an hour, the thieves carry out the burglary with almost no dialogue and practically no music. Every action matters. They enter through the ceiling. They work around an alarm system. Tools are handled carefully. Communication happens through gestures. The silence makes every tiny sound terrifying. Audiences had never seen a robbery presented with such patient detail. Some authorities worried criminals might study the sequence like an instruction manual. Mexico banned the film after officials claimed real burglaries had copied methods shown on screen. Finland also prohibited it before later allowing a heavily edited version. American distributors faced additional pressure over other scenes. What makes the censorship almost funny today is that Dassin's film clearly does not celebrate criminal life. The robbery itself succeeds, but nearly everything afterward falls apart. Friendships collapse. Greed takes control. Violence follows. The characters lose far more than they gain. Still, authorities remembered the technique. Rififi became the rare crime movie considered dangerous not because criminals looked cool, but because they looked competent. Number 5. Horror of Dracula, 1958. By the late 1950s, audiences thought they understood Dracula. Then Christopher Lee walked through the door. Hammer Films transformed Bram Stoker's vampire into something faster, more physical, more threatening, and far less polite than earlier screen versions. Peter Cushing plays Van Helsing with equal energy. Instead of an elderly scholar slowly discovering supernatural clues, Cushing's vampire hunter moves like an action hero, racing through rooms, fighting physically, and confronting danger directly. The movie announces its new style almost immediately. Bright color fills the screen. Red lettering appears over Gothic imagery. Blood is suddenly visible, in a way black and white horror had rarely allowed. Christopher Lee's Dracula barely needs dialogue. His height, expression, sudden movement, and physical presence make him terrifying. The final confrontation became one of Hammer's defining scenes. Van Helsing realizes sunrise is approaching. He races through Dracula's castle, leaps onto furniture, pulls down curtains, and exposes the vampire to daylight. Dracula's destruction happens directly before the audience. For viewers accustomed to more restrained horror, the sequence was shocking. Censors responded accordingly. The movie faced bans in several European countries, while other territories demanded cuts before permitting exhibition. Britain released it with an X certificate, restricting younger viewers. Yet those restrictions only strengthened Hammer's identity. The studio understood that teenagers wanted horror their parents considered too intense. Soon the Hammer formula, bright color, Gothic atmosphere, physical danger, glamorous stars, and more visible violence, was being copied everywhere. Dracula had survived for decades. In 1958, censorship helped make him young again. Number 4. The Garden of Eden, 1954. Imagine making what appears to be a quiet family drama, and suddenly finding yourself in the middle of a legal battle over what American adults were allowed to watch. The story follows Susan Lattimore, a war widow, traveling through Florida with her young daughter. Circumstances bring them to a naturist community, where Susan initially feels uncomfortable with the residents and their unusual lifestyle. Instead of depicting the people living there as strange or threatening, however, the movie presents them as friendly, peaceful, and surprisingly ordinary. That was exactly what worried censors. The filmmakers were not warning viewers against the community. They were presenting another way of living, without turning it into a horror story. The most talked about scenes are not dramatic confrontations at all. They show residents swimming, relaxing, playing games, and continuing with everyday life. The photography carefully avoids anything considered too explicit, yet in the conservative climate of the 1950s, simply placing these images on a commercial cinema screen was enough to cause outrage. New York authorities tried to prevent the picture from being shown, claiming its imagery made it unacceptable. The distributors challenged that decision, and the controversy eventually became an important censorship case. What looked like a cheap exploitation picture unexpectedly helped weaken the idea that authorities could automatically declare a movie obscene simply because the human body appeared on screen. Number 3. Paths of Glory, 1957. Stanley Kubrick's anti-war masterpiece contains no supernatural monster. Its monsters wear uniforms, sit behind desks, and speak politely about sacrifice. Kirk Douglas plays Colonel Dax, a French officer during the First World War. His soldiers are ordered to attack a heavily defended German position known as the Anthill. Dax understands the operation is almost impossible. His superiors insist anyway. Before the attack begins, Kubrick takes the audience into the trenches. The camera follows Dax as he moves past exhausted soldiers, exploding shells, mud, fear, and confusion. Then the whistle blows. Men climb into open ground and immediately encounter overwhelming fire. Some cannot even leave the trench. The attack collapses. For General Moreau, however, failure cannot be blamed on terrible planning. He decides the soldiers themselves must be responsible. 3 men are selected as examples. The military trial that follows is even more disturbing than the battlefield, because everyone involved understands the proceedings are designed to produce a particular result. Dax tries desperately to defend the accused soldiers, yet reason means little when powerful officers are protecting their reputations. The portrayal of French military leadership created enormous international controversy. The movie was kept out of France for years. Switzerland restricted it. Franco's Spain prohibited it. U.S. military authorities refused to show it at certain installations. None of that is surprising. Kubrick's message is ruthless. The ordinary soldier suffers. The ambitious officer survives. Number 2. The Wild One, 1953. Marlon Brando needed little more than that to create one of the most influential images of teenage rebellion ever filmed. He plays Johnny Strabler, leader of the Black Rebels Motorcycle Club. Johnny and his gang arrive in a small California town after causing trouble at a motorcycle event. At first, the atmosphere seems more irritating than dangerous. The bikers make noise. They take over local spaces. Residents become nervous. Then another motorcycle group arrives, and tension begins escalating. Johnny becomes attracted to Kathy, the daughter of a local police officer, but he never transforms into a traditional romantic hero. He remains distant, angry, confused, and uncertain about what he actually wants. The movie's defining exchange comes when someone asks what Johnny is rebelling against. His answer basically suggests, "What have you got?" That short response captured an entire cultural anxiety. Johnny does not have a political manifesto. He is rebelling because rebellion itself gives him an identity. For conservative authorities, this was dangerous. If the movie had clearly explained that Johnny was evil, audiences could simply reject him. Instead, Brando made him magnetic. Young men copied his clothes, hairstyle, posture, and motorcycle image. British censors refused the movie a certificate, effectively keeping it out of ordinary theaters for 14 years. New Zealand also reacted strongly, while youth organizations and moral campaigners in other places warned that films like this might encourage antisocial behavior. The most important scenes are not even the fights. They are the moments when Johnny sits silently while adults become increasingly desperate to understand him. He represents something they cannot control. The censorship accidentally made that image stronger. Number 1. Blackboard Jungle, 1955. What frightened authorities more than motorcycles? Adult romance, political criticism, or vampires? A classroom full of teenagers. Blackboard Jungle begins with a sound that practically announces the arrival of a new generation. Bill Haley and his Comets perform Rock Around the Clock over the opening credits. Today, the song feels cheerful and nostalgic. In 1955, it sounded revolutionary. Glenn Ford plays Richard Dadier, a teacher beginning work at a difficult inner-city school. He arrives expecting to educate young men. Instead, he discovers an environment where many students distrust teachers, authority figures struggle to maintain control, and frustration can turn into confrontation at any moment. Dadier wants to believe every student can be reached. Reality keeps challenging him. Sidney Poitier plays Gregory Miller, one of the most intelligent students in the class. At first, Dadier suspects Miller might be another troublemaker because he has influence over the other boys. Gradually, however, the teacher realizes Miller is more complicated. The real threat comes from Artie West, played by Vic Morrow. West is angry, manipulative, and determined to challenge Dadier's authority. Their conflict eventually leads to the classroom confrontation audiences remembered most. West produces a weapon and threatens his teacher, while the other students watch. Dadier refuses to surrender. The fight that follows becomes a test, not only of physical courage, but of whether the classroom will remain controlled by fear. For many 1950s viewers, this material was shocking. Hollywood usually presented teenagers as clean-cut young people worried about dating, sports, and family misunderstandings. So which of these 19 supposedly dangerous movies really deserved the panic surrounding it? Some bans disappeared, others became embarrassing censorship footnotes, and several restrictions lasted for decades. What remains fascinating is how ordinary many of these once forbidden films look today. Tell us which entry surprised you most, and if you enjoy forgotten scandals from classic cinema, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with another old movie fan.